You got me practicing my spells. But that is because this week on Seashore we have CSS wizard himself, Harry Roberts. And without further ado, apparition! Okay, welcome to Seashore. Today on the channel we have CSS wizard himself, Harry Roberts. Welcome to the channel.
Hey, how are you?
So, for those who don't know who you are, can you give us a little bit of an intro as to who you are and what you do, and probably what CSS is, as there may be viewers who to this channel who aren't aware of what CSS is, and how you got started in what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. So, my name's Harry. I'm based in Leeds in the north of England. And I guess professionally, I'm a consultant web developer now. What that normally means is I work with clients on a fairly short-term basis to help them get a handle on things like front-end architecture and specifically web performance these days. But yeah, my background is in CSS, which is an incredibly simple syntax which powers every website anybody has ever looked at. But with that simplicity comes a lot of, I guess, looseness or difficulty in management. So while CSS is an incredibly simple syntax, managing it at any reasonable sort of scale is quite difficult, and it leans a lot upon disciplined engineers or tooling and process. So a lot of my job is around helping define and manage that.
Cool. And you created something called Inuit CSS way back when, and that was your sort of first starting point with creating CSS frameworks and things like that, right?
That's correct, yeah. Inuit doesn't get talked about much anymore, which I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I think ultimately the goal of any framework is obsolescence, right? Things become standardized and gets phased out. I was about 19, maybe a little bit older when I started. No, I must have been a little bit older, maybe 20, 21 when I started working on Inuit CSS. And 2020, in fact, 2020 hindsight, calling something Inuit wasn't perhaps my most sensitive move ever. Talk about a bit of white guy appropriation. So yeah, a bit of a misfire there perhaps. But yeah, Inuit CSS, I don't even know where the name came from. That's the weirdest thing. But it was developed, honestly, almost a decade ago now. That's when it first started getting worked on, I think. As like an abstraction, a way of managing CSS structurally. So not doing any styling, not doing anything like, here's what your nav will look like, or here's how your drop-down appears. And it was a way to abstract repeated design patterns out for use in high-scale environments. So a real key focus on abstraction and reuse, keeping line count low, therefore helping performance. My involvement in Inuit CSS is almost zero, and has been for the last several years. I've got a wonderful team of maintainers from Germany, France, Serbia, who all band together to basically be Inuit CSS's core development team. I don't even take the role of benevolent leader anymore. I've got this incredible team making a lot of the architectural decisions, a lot of the guiding principles, and I think all of the folk working on Inuit CSS know exactly why it exists and what it was created for. So it's almost like they're the perfect people to continue that work because they get it, right? They've used it, they've lived it. So yeah, my involvement's almost nil at the moment.
And did you think that creating that back then would lead you to where you are right now in terms of your career, and how that kind of skyrocketed from doing something like that?
It was never the intention. In fact, if I'd have thought it would have had that kind of effect, I would have taken it more seriously, perhaps had a bit more of a roadmap for it. But also, I'm not sure how much I would attribute Inuit CSS to anything nowadays. Well, it's one of those things where it may have been instrumental, it may have not been, and there's no way of, because I didn't intend it to go that way. I never set up any metrics. There's only really a handful of clients I've ever had that have contacted me because of or in reference to Inuit CSS. There is every chance that it's been a huge part of getting sort of my career to where it is now, but I never intended to measure it, therefore I couldn't ever know. One of the most sort of frightening things, not frightening, maybe sobering things that happened to me in the last few years, I was contacted by General Electric, I think like the 9th biggest company on the planet, I think it is. All of their software engineers use Inuit CSS. Their design system is built on Inuit CSS. And that was a fascinating project to be involved with, because that's when I realized the gravity of this thing and like, oh wow, it's being used everywhere. But other than that, yeah, it's nowadays especially, it doesn't really play much of a role in my work at all, which is, maybe I should tidy it back up.
So you speak at a lot of conferences and meetups and stuff. So when did you discover that you like doing that? Or do you like doing that? I guess, do you get this? And I guess going back along the lines of how we knew at CSS has helped your career, how has the conference speaking helped your career as well?
This is a really good question. Well, yeah, I like that you sort of reworded it halfway through. I never found out that I liked speaking. And I'll be honest with you, I'm a little bit suspicious of anyone who does enjoy it, because there's very little to enjoy about being on stage, all eyes on you in front of hundreds of people. What actually happened was in late 2011, late 2011, sort of like winter, I got an email from a conference called Front Trends, and Front Trends is a remarkable, like very good if you're a technical person, technical front-end developer, really good conference out in Warsaw, about between 400 and 500 attendees, I would say. And the email was nuts, because they said, hey, Harry, we've read your blog for a while, because I've been blogging since 2007. 2011, they contacted me, hey, we've been reading your blog, have you thought about speaking? I was like, of course I haven't. No one thinks about that. It's terrifying. And they were like, if you would like to come and give your first ever talk at our conference, we would gladly host you. And I was terrified by the prospect, really wasn't sure it was going to be a great idea at all. And actually I went to my mum, who I don't really tend to go to my parents for advice. She was like, do it. If you don't like it, at least find out you didn't like it, and then at least you'll know. And if you do like it, it could be... So I agreed to that. It took about a week of deciding, and I agreed, I'll do it. I'll do my first ever talk in Warsaw, Poland. But then what happened is, in the interim, a guy called Kim Jones from Barnsley emailed me saying, hey, Harry, we're running an event called Digital Barn, very early 2012. Do you want to come and speak at that? So the timeline was, I guess, invited by Front Trends in Warsaw, then invited by Digital Barn in Barnsley, just as exotic, if not more. And then my first conference ended up being the one in Barnsley. So I spoke at Barnsley, then Warsaw. So it's this weird overlap where my first ever invite was this conference, took a huge gamble on me. And then Kim Jones sort of got in touch maybe a week or two later, and I ultimately ended up speaking at my first event ever in Barnsley, which is great, Yorkshire. But it wasn't for years. I mean, I'm talking a good couple of years afterwards that I started to enjoy it, because I still got nervous to the point where I wouldn't be able to sleep properly for several days before the event. And certainly the 1 or 2 days leading up to the talk itself, couldn't eat. I'd be a nightmare to be around. I'd be too stressed to give anybody proper attention. And actually, there's a real turning point in my speaking career, for want of a better word. Beyond Tellerrand, which is by far one of the most incredible events one could ever attend, right? Beyond Tellerrand, run by my mate, my friend Mark out in Germany. In 2013, so over a year after my first ever speaking engagement, I was over it. I was like, no, can't stand it. The stress isn't worth it. I get worked up and blah, blah, blah. And I was still working a full-time job at this point. I was still full-time employed at Sky, so I couldn't really have much time dedicated to speaking. And I remember just thinking, do you know what, I'm over it, no more speaking for me. And Mark pestered me for a good couple of months, like, Harry, please speak at my event. And I was like, look, not interested, speaking's not for me, don't enjoy it. And his persistence paid off, because I was like, do you know what, fine, let's do it. And that was one of the most formative conferences I've ever attended. It's the conference that really made me realize that, do you know what, I can do this, and I can find enjoyment in it. But also, it prompted me to quit my job. It was a big part of why I ended up going independent. Was I saw a talk there by James Victore, which was just completely shifted my perspective and ultimately led to me handing my notice in at Sky. But then what happened was, still don't really enjoy it, still definitely get nervous. My advice to anyone speaking, whether they're a new speaker or a veteran, if you're the kind of person who's going to get nervous, you are going to get nervous. There's no point trying to second guess that. There's no point trying to work around it. Just acknowledge it, embrace it, work out what your cues and tells are. If you need to be on your own before you get on stage, just go and do it. Don't force yourself to sit in the front row getting nervous around people. So yeah, I still get nerves. You will often see me pacing off the side of the stage 5 minutes before my talk, drinking way too much water, needing a pee halfway through my talk because my nervous tick is to just drink. But yeah, it's just something you work on. And after doing over 100 public conference events now, I've got to a point where, although I still get nervous, it's completely manageable. I do, to an extent, look forward to getting on stage. But for me, I'm the kind of person where that did take a lot of time.
Okay, so, and has that helped with your, I mean, you said it made you kind of quit your job and quit your day job and stuff like that. Has the speaking helped get clients in and help get new work in and stuff like that?
Massively. Yeah, massively. I think there are two key things that I would attribute to my, work. Success is the wrong word to use. It sounds so righteous, but work things is a blog and speaking. The speaking thing is massive because it's got the tangible or almost like quantifiable side of a client will email me, hey, we saw you speak at this event, we need that for us. And that's a very easy thing to track, and that's a very like input-output based thing. But the flip side is it does a lot to bolster kind of goodwill and credibility. So even if a client hasn't seen me speak at a conference, a potential client hasn't seen me, they'll land on my site and see, oh right, this guy does speak at conferences, therefore he must know what he's talking about. And there's this weird kind of power play there. So there's the much more intangible and non-quantifiable side of what it would do as positioning yourself, I guess. So yeah, it's tremendous, of huge value. I'd recommend it to anyone who can get the opportunity to speak and and wants to do it. Massive benefits for as far as career is concerned.
Along those lines, is how do you go about getting new work or coming up with new ideas? Do most things come to you these days, or do you have to kind of put effort into chasing things up, or how does that work?
Generally, by and large, clients come to me. I would say over 90% of inquiries are people who have found me. Now, what's quite interesting is I'm a bit shameless with my client list, I guess. If you hit my homepage on my site, there's a big wall of logos. Now, of course, General Electric don't know who I am, never heard of me. Unilever, no idea who I am. What it will be is an individual in those organizations who maybe follows my blog or has seen me at a conference. So again, it's that visibility there which will prompt them to perhaps go to their engineering manager and so on. So the majority of inquiries, very, very sort of thankfully, they come to me. There are a few outliers where there are certain clients where I've been thinking, you know what, they need what I've got to offer, and I will approach them. So kind of a bit of a secret here, but Etsy, a client of mine, that came about because I'm really good friends with Lara Hogan. She's an absolute hero. She's just prolific. She's great. And we were just having like a fairly casual chat about how things are going work-wise. And at this point, she was engineering manager at Etsy. And she just mentioned in passing, oh yeah, we're in the process of refactoring all of our Etsy CSS onto SAS. And I just said, half jokingly, well, you know, if you need any help with that, I could probably lend a hand. And she was like, actually, do you know what? Maybe, yeah. And then next thing you know, I'm flying up to New York to go and do a workshop for Etsy. So having personal connections, and not in like a schmoozy, sleazy way either, just making friends with people on the internet or at conferences. So every now and again, there are a couple of clients that I've kind of landed that way. Google is one of them. I was hanging out with a friend of mine from Google down in London, Paul Lewis, and a few engineers had got wind that I was in the building and they wanted to ask me questions about CSS. And I jokingly said, hey, look, if you're going to be asking me these questions, I'm going to have to charge you. Maybe we should do a workshop. And Adi Osmani was like, you know, actually, it's not a bad idea, yeah. And then we got the ball rolling, and next thing you know, I'm doing a workshop for Google. So yeah, things like that, they're kind of handy. But yeah, it's a long answer to a short question. Generally, clients will come to me. What's been interesting, if I'm going to be completely honest, I had a couple of really interesting inquiries just before the pandemic hit. I won't name the clients, but one of them is of particular interest to me as a cyclist, a brand that I really, really like. And the other one was basically, imagine it's just as bad as getting an airline getting in touch with you, right? Imagine how hard airlines have been hit by the pandemic. It wasn't an airline, but very similar. So I was thinking, right, that's Q1 through 2 kind of largely solved. And then the pandemic hit, and both of those clients were very, very open and honest, and like, hey, Harry, like, this has obviously been deprioritized. So that's left me a bit on the back foot, because my pipeline has now got this big chunk missing out of it. So now I'm at a point where, I need to start thinking about new business. If we're going to a recession, there's going to be less spending confidence, which means that self-employed people are probably going to struggle unless they've got something really beneficial to offer. So for me, it's for the first time in my sort of self-employed career, I'm having to get a bit more strategic. I can't just rely on a wealthy tech firm having budget. They'll need to be a bit more considered and calculated with what they spend it on. So it's been a bit of an eye-opener. I'm fielding plenty of inquiries, but I'm just very aware that, okay, right, things are different now.
Following on from that, you're doing some other things as well in the time that you've got without doing work. One of those is you've written an ebook. How did that come about? And do you worry that you're kind of giving away your secrets, as it were, as to how you're successful and how your work is going?
Yeah. So the ebook came about because I work as a consultant, and I will be completely honest, towards the beginning of my consultancy career, I was a bit, I'm not going to say clueless, because I had the technical solutions, but I wasn't really aware of how a consultant should conduct business. And I was always under the false impression that I shouldn't ask any questions, because if I do, my client might think I'm stupid, or might think that, why have we hired this guy if he's asking us more questions than he's giving answers? And then after a few years, I realized that that's just a debilitating position to put myself in. That vow of silence just wasn't good for me or my clients. Yeah, they got the results, but it may have taken a bit longer than it should. So I just started keeping a GitHub repository of really great questions that I would ask clients. Questions that seem really simple on the face of it, but once you peel back the hidden meanings, just surface loads of information. And these are all questions that made me very effective in a very short space of time. As a consultant, I don't really have the luxury of 6 months of onboarding, getting to know the product. I need to be right there, day one, effective. So I started just keeping a GitHub repository of all these questions that I could just use whenever I needed to. And then that spun out into the idea of, well, if they're useful to me, they should be useful to other people. And back in late 2018, I just fired a tweet out saying, hey, would anybody be interested in reading this? And there was a lot of interest. And as is often the way with me, I was like, oh, cool, people are interested. I'll get around to that. Never. So that was late 2018, and I didn't actually put pen to paper until 10th of April 2020, when I was looking at my calendar thinking, right, well, I can't go to that conference, that client's postponed, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, just hammered it out. It was a really fun experience, 35,000 words in 15 days. It taught me a lot about a lot. It was intense. I wouldn't say I regret it, but I wouldn't do it again. I would give myself more planning. I'm very, 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 very happy with the outcome. I'm very happy with the finished product, but it was unnecessary amounts of stress, just 4 hours sleep a night. And of course, the less sleep you get, it's like diminishing returns, right? You end up being less effective the next day, whatever. But it was good, got it out, and yeah, that was how that came about. I just wanted to get something out there, put it up for pre-sale, and it's actually, for an ebook, quite expensive, because as you say, there is a risk of giving away my secrets. The book would enable someone, so if one of my competitors were to get hold of that, if they've got the same offering as me, the same technical abilities, et cetera, that's going to bring them close to parity. That would be a risky thing for them to have access to. But I've built an entire career on sharing. I've given away a lot of secrets in the past, and it's served me well. I'm a bit of a hippie in that regard. I think that I learned most of the things I ever learned about the web were learned for free. I'm a big believer in sort of giving back. So yeah, I did charge for the book, but not crazy money. There is a risk that I'm giving away secrets, but I was very calculated in what I did and didn't say as well. It went really well. The feedback's been fantastic, so I'm really glad I did it.
You also run a conference, which you decided to put online live during this pandemic time. How did you decide to put it online, or compared to postponing it for the guests to come later at a date?
To start with, yes, I run a small conference once a year along with a friend of mine, Josh. It's a single day, single track, fairly small event. So basically, what's it going to be? 220, 250 attendees in person in Leeds. What was really annoying is right up until the very last minute, there was very little official word from the government about what would happen regarding such events. So it wasn't until very late in the day that we realised we couldn't run the conference. And I was actually saying, well, Josh, do you know what? We've hit so many different hurdles with this year's event. We had funding issues, etc. I was like, let's just leave it. Let's just do it again in 2021. Let's just leave this year. And Josh was very insistent, like, dude, we can't just have a gap in the calendar. We need to do it. So he did all the work. He did all the research to look into how you might run a conference online. I wasn't reluctant or pessimistic. It wasn't that. It was just a case of I'm a bit of a realist, and I was thinking, look, dude, we've never done this before. I don't really know how it's going to work. And he was like, look, leave it with me. I'm doing my research. And yeah, he did it. All I really did was found the speakers. They were amazing. They were very supportive. But we managed to run with Josh's research and a production team. Our first ever online event went really, really well. The speakers were incredible. A little bit of an insider secret. We didn't actually run the day fully live. We got the speakers to pre-record all of their talks. And then Josh and Phil Hawksworth and me, we were there live on the day to cut between different things. But all the talks were pre-recorded just to avoid any inevitable technical glitches. It went really well, went really, really well. We sold about double the tickets we normally would. I just got word from Josh this morning that we actually managed to break even. So we didn't make a loss on it. It was all self-funded. So yeah, really happy with how it went.
So with your day job and speaking and writing and creating creating a conference and running all that, how do you fit all of that in, especially when you're really busy? How do you fit all of your kind of engagements in? Do you take time out for yourself during the day, or you kind of flat out from word go to from day go to day end, as it were?
I don't think I do that much, to be honest. I don't know. I don't have... that's a really good question. So normally what ends up happening to me is when it's business as usual, when there isn't an Armageddon happening, I often end up looking at my calendar and just thinking, what have I done? I say yes to everything. So what ends up happening is I will get loads of invites to conferences all over the calendar, and I'll say yes. But of course, conferences don't approach me in chronological order, so I might say yes to the last event of the year first, and so on. So normal business as usual, I'm very erratic, very sporadic, because I just don't manage my calendar very well. My enthusiasm gets the better of me. So what I'll tend to do is just work as much as I can in between things. So flights are a great time to do email. There's nothing else to do on a flight. I'm not really a sit down and watch a film kind of guy, so I would sit and do a couple of hours of email. I'm really good at playing to my own sort of motivations. So if I have an idea to write an article, I will just write it. I'll just get on with it. I don't tend to plan very well, which is a bad thing, right? But so sometimes procrastination gets the better of me, and it ends up being an article or a small open source project. But generally, I tend to find I have a lot of time. I don't really make time for things that, like I said, I can't just sit and watch a film. I'm really bad at that, because it just feels like, because if I watch a film, I generally tend to watch a film I've already seen before, because at least I know that I'm going to like it. For me, sitting in front of Netflix and thinking, am I really going to bet 2.5 hours of my life on this thing? So yeah, generally, I'm always doing something that, I don't know, would feel productive, to me at least. But I'm not into that kind of hustle porn that people talk about. If you don't leave lockdown having done X, Y, and Z, you're a failure. So yeah, generally I just busy myself. I don't have that much going on, really. I don't have a family or kids or anything, which frees up untold amounts of time. So very privileged in that regard. So yeah, days at the moment on lockdown look fairly repetitive. What I will try and do is get a full night's sleep. So I'll get up around 8 a.m., having gone to bed around midnight. Do admin and stuff in the morning. Trying to stay reasonably healthy. So I'm doing a certain amount of mileage a week on a turbo trainer indoors, which helps with elbow rehab and stuff. But yeah, I don't feel particularly productive at the moment, and I don't have any kind of life hacks. I think I subscribe to my mum and dad's generation of productivity tips, which is just look at what you've got to get done and do it. So I don't have any life hacks. I just I've got to do this. This needs doing, so I better get on it.
There was an incident a few years ago though, where you may have sort of burned yourself out from a point of view, and you kind of collapsed on stage. When you were doing the talk.
Oh, yeah.
So you've obviously mitigated, sort of that danger. I mean, we've all been there as well. How did you find yourself in that position, and what did you do to kind of make sure it didn't happen again?
Well, I actually think that specific incident. Okay, so the background, I guess. The background for most people who won't know what we're talking about. 24th of July, 2013. Yeah, 24th of July. I remember it very well. It was the week of the... oh my goodness, I'll have to remember it for the show notes. But Dan Donald's mini-series of events in the north of England. I was set to speak at the Liverpool edition. 24th of July, so it was a really hot day, which kind of added to the whole atmosphere. But that was the day I quit my job. I went to my manager at Sky Bet in Leeds, and I said, look, I actually had the day off work, and I texted him saying, hey, can we go for a coffee? And he was like, you're not in work today, so I'm sensing if you want a meeting now, it's bad news. And I was like, look, can we just go for a coffee? And he said, we better make it a beer. So went and had a beer, quit my job with no plans. I had no idea what I was doing next. I was just like, look, I've run my course at Sky. It's been wonderful, but I need to do something different. Immediately after I'd done that, I then hopped on a train, got over to Liverpool to deliver a talk, which ironically was about not burning out. So this whole entire week, I'd been going to all these different events. I was only speaking at this one on the 24th. I just quit my job with no real plan what to do next. And I think the whole ordeal of everything just got to me. The whole weight of everything just hit at the most inopportune moment. I mean, maybe TMI, too much information, but I entered a new romantic relationship that very same day. So all of a sudden got a girlfriend on the scene. I've just quit my job. I've got to give a talk. I've been traveling around the north of England all week. I was averaging less than 3 hours sleep a night. And I get on stage ready to give this talk, and then lights out. So yeah, I mean, could have seen it coming a mile off, really. It wasn't too much of a mystery. So I wouldn't attribute it to existential burnout as such. It was more of a very concentrated, rapid-fire series of events. Blacked out on stage, was unfortunately unable to finish my talk. I was sweating head to toe, but freezing cold, shivering like mad. It was kind of weird. After it had all finished, I felt great. It was like I just had a hard reset. It's like, do you know what? Unstoppable now. The way I've mitigated that is just not doing stupid things again. Young and foolish, I guess. I'm very, very fortunate in that I really, really love what I do, and incredibly fortunate in that I don't have to do it that often. So, people say, well, find a job that you love. Well, it'd be better not to have a job at all, right? If we're being really honest. So I actually work a minority of the year, I would say. If you look at calendar days, I would spend most of my time actually not working. I work in concentrated bursts, which means I can make time for riding bikes, which would be my stress relief, or heading to the gym, or whatever it might be. Now I'm speaking from an incredibly privileged position here, because the majority of people the world over cannot do what I do. But by having just sensible limits with myself, like, hey, I love my job, but maybe it's not sensible to go to 4 different cities back to back for conferences. Maybe I ought to try and delay this client for a month if I can get them to, schedule things differently. So time management, and also making room for things that aren't work and that aren't going to make me feel stressed. There are things I could do better. Like, for example, I am terrible at accounts. I hate paperwork. I hate paperwork more than anything. And I let it get the better of me. I will just put it off. And then my accountant, who are wonderful, go crunch, they'll have to chase me on things like, hey, Harry, you need to do this paperwork. And I'm like, yeah, I'm sure I do. I probably do, don't I? I probably do. I'll do it another time. Just being disciplined about getting that stuff done and removing that stress that sits over your head. It's like, all right, brilliant. Well, that's done. I can do whatever I want with the rest of my week now. So just a bit more discipline. I've often said this. It's almost paradoxical. I would be a lot more free if I worked less. I'd be a lot more free if I worked more, right? If I actually sat down and did a solid block of admin on a Monday morning, that could completely relieve the stress of the rest of the week if I just got it done in one go. Ironically, by not doing it, I spend the rest of that week thinking, I must get that done, I must do this, and I'll do that when I get in, or I'll do that tomorrow morning. So yeah, I think that just being more disciplined and actually, like I say, almost paradoxically, doing more work would leave me with more spare time.
You have been doing some videos on Twitter, making cocktails and teaching people how to cook steak. How did that come about? How did you get so foodie? And how did you think, I'm just going to make a cocktail video?
The foodie thing, I'm not actually a massive foodie. There'll be people out there who are genuinely like MasterChef level who will probably see my tweets and think, yeah, this guy's an idiot. But growing up, I came from very, very simple background, very humble beginnings. Didn't have a lot of cash, so eating out was maybe a couple of times a year for birthdays or whatever. And my parents both came from even more humble beginnings. So for them, cooking cheaply, but good filling Northern English food, right? Cooked for way too long, completely underseasoned. I grew up on that stuff. So just a very strong culture of cooking for oneself in my family. I've lived alone for 10 years, so I've had to cook for myself. But that coupled with living in the middle of a really great food and drink city, traveling a lot for work means I have to eat out most nights. I'm kind of the opinion that if I'm going to do it, I'll embrace it. So yeah, just after eating a lot, I thought, well, do you know what? I need to be able to cook this for myself. So that's how I got slightly more foodie than I used to be, I guess. The booze, you can probably see the barge over my shoulder there. The booze is a very interesting story. I grew up, like I say, north of England, drinking pints of real ale. Timothy Taylor's Landlord, a classic. And I didn't really drink anything else. Gin just tasted like old women. Whiskey tasted like fires. I just couldn't get on with anything. But then a really good friend of mine slowly got me onto the idea of rum, gin and tonic, etc. And that kind of got a bit carried away with itself. So yeah, that was, again, when you're traveling a lot for work, there's no shortage of bars. And I'm a very social creature. I cannot just sit and get room service and sit in a hotel room. So I will look up, hey, where's good to just bar hang? I've got no qualms going and sitting in a restaurant or a bar on my own. And again, you start to pick things up like, oh, they did that different to the last time I had one of these, or this worked that way. And I'll often just chat to bartenders and start to learn about things. So yeah, over the last, I guess, nearly 5 years now, I've been growing this home bar. It's not really grown much for the last 3 years. Weirdly, I don't drink much at home at all. But over lockdown, bars are a huge part of, certainly, I'd say, Western culture. They're a good place to socialise, meet friends, make friends. And we've had all that kind of taken away from, well, no, not taken away from us. That sounds very like I'm being a victim. But you know what I mean? At the moment, we can't do any of that. We can't go and meet our pals for a pint. So I thought, well, I could open up Harry's Bar and maybe just, I don't know what I was thinking. But yeah, I did a few live streams. They went down really well. Just not really had the time to do them recently. But yeah, just showing people how to make drinks. It's a fun thing to do. And also, if you're like me, you get really obsessed about things. So a cocktail that you might just order and not think twice about may have a fascinating history of who knows what. So for me, it's a really good way to indulge in something that is still learning, but it's non-screen based, it's non-technical. It's not mentally challenging, it's just more fascination and sort of going down rabbit holes, I guess.
Yeah. And you mentioned that you're in Leeds and stuff. And I've been to Leeds. I love Leeds. What do you think is the best thing about Leeds? You know, I love Bunderbust. Bunderbust is my favorite place.
Oh, Bunderbust. Oh, yeah, you're right. So Bunderbust, Indian vegetarian street food and a lot of craft beer. What more could you possibly want? Pro tip: just outside of Leeds. If you're at Bunderbust, it's probably going to be less than a 15-minute Uber ride. There's Prashad, which is like a fine dining restaurant run by the same people, and Prashad is really cheap. You get a full tasting menu for 60 quid. But it's imagine Bunderbust, but like fancy. Oh, so good. But yeah, well, that answers the question, I guess. My favourite thing about Leeds, the best thing about Leeds has to be the food and drink. It's an odd city. It's the second biggest in the country. We've got 2.8 million people here, I think. It's a big, big city. But there's zero tourism. We don't have any famous architecture. We don't have any sports stadiums. We don't really have anything that brings much tourism. What we have got is a huge legal and financial sector. So it's quite a wealthy city. And all these different things interplay with one another to the point where you've got a city with not many tourists and a lot of relatively wealthy people. The food and drink economy tends to thrive. If there's no tourists, there's no one to sell bad food to. So the food is generally all pretty good. And if a lot of the people living there have got disposable income, food and drink is probably one of the first places to spend it. So yeah, I'd say Leeds, the highlight is going to be food and drink. What I've realised is that since being on lockdown, there isn't really much else to do in Leeds other than get fat and drunk. So having had that all stripped away from me, I'm like, oh well, yeah, Leeds is it's good if you work in tech, it's good if you're a student, and it's good if you like food and drink.
So from starting your own business and taking the plunge to do that, what would be your kind of top 3 tips to people maybe wanting to take that plunge to go self-employed and go out on themselves?
Wow. Okay. Okay. 3 tips. The first one is oddly specific, but I did it, and I would recommend everyone else does the same. Whatever your notice period is, give longer than that. So I had 3 months. Well, actually, I didn't opt into this, but I was a senior engineer at Sky, and senior members of staff were all given a 3-month notice period. I'm sure anybody who's looked for a job before, that stress of kind of going behind your boss's back, you're booking days off for going to the doctor when really you're going for a job interview, and all that kind of secrecy. It shouldn't be secret because it's business, right? And you're allowed to go for job interviews, but that stress and angst of keeping it secret, you can't broadcast things like you would like to. So ultimately what I did is I sort of told my manager, look, I'm leaving my job. In 3 months, I will not be here. And they asked me, what are you doing next? And I didn't have an answer for them, but I thought, well, if I can't work it out in 3 months, maybe I don't deserve the opportunity, right? 3 months, if you can't work it out in 3 months, then you've got other problems, right? So I just sort of left without a plan. But what immediately happened was my boss knew that I was leaving. My manager, knew that I didn't know what I was doing next. I didn't do any planning on work time because you've got to do the right thing, right? You've got to be ethical about it. But it gave me 3 months of unashamedly talking about opportunities with prospective clients, prospective new employers. Didn't have to be secretive. I could put tweets out saying, hey, as of this date, I'm available for freelance work or consultancy or wherever it was. So give yourself plenty of lead time. Make sure you've got enough time to openly put plans together. That could be saying to your manager, hey, look, my notice period is 1 month, but I'm giving you 3. You just got to hope that they don't end up turn scumbaggy and then say, well, do you know what? We'll cut you off right now then. So give yourself plenty of lead time. If you don't feel ready for it, you probably aren't. Not a very motivational thing to hear, but if you're not ready for it, you're not ready for it. Don't rush it. Put in the groundwork. People always get disheartened when they hear me say this, but I've been blogging since 2007. I went self-employed in late 2013. So you've already got nearly 6 years of exposure and building a brand there. So that's 6 years that a lot of people don't account for. They're like, oh, well, of course you can go freelance. You've got a huge following. Well, yeah, but I didn't win it on a scratch card. So lay the groundwork. So yeah, give yourself a lot of lead time. Lay the groundwork, whether that is making yourself an authority on whatever technology you specialize in, whether that's speaking at meetups and conferences, whether that is blogging, whatever it is. Make sure you've got some kind of substance to carry you. And I guess the third and final tip is be really selfish about it. This is your chance to do what you want to do. Optimize for your enjoyment. So one thing I did when I went self-employed, just before, really simple exercise, and I really hope I've still got the piece of paper somewhere just for like sentimental reasons. I got a sheet of A4. For anyone at home who doesn't know what A4 is. And I split it down the middle, and on one side I wrote, what can I do? What am I capable of? I can code, I can talk, I can speak, right? I can do talks and workshops. I can do technical writing. I wrote down everything that someone could conceivably hire me for. If you need someone who can write your documentation, I could do that. I may not really enjoy, or that might not be what I'm passionate about, but I wrote down a list of everything that I can provide for a potential client. On the other half of that bit of paper, I wrote down everything that I personally wanted to get out of self-employment. Money didn't really factor into that, so it wasn't a wealth thing, it wasn't a earning potential thing, but I wanted autonomy. I wanted to feel valued. I wanted to make sure that I was having an impact, so that rather than being a part of a big machine, I wanted to make sure that I could work with potentially a small part of a bigger company and have a meaningful, lasting impact there. I wanted freedom, I wanted travel. I mean, that's, like I said, be selfish with this. And what I did is I just looked at these two lists and I thought, well, how can this list of things I can provide, how can I tie the ribbons together to get me to this side of the list, which is what I want out of everything? That's ultimately how I ended up going the consultancy route. It gave me lots of freedom and lots of travel, lots of autonomy, huge impact, because as the consultant, you're often guiding and shaping entire projects. So yeah, my third and final bit of advice would be optimize for exactly what you want. You don't need to have... A lot of people leave full-time employment and just replicate a 9-to-5 by contracting. If that's what you want, then 100% go ahead and do it, because your earning potential is much higher, and whatever. But for me, that wasn't a motivator. So I just used it as a real opportunity to carve out exactly what I wanted out of self-employment. I didn't want to get rich. I didn't want to do like 9-to-5 style work. So for me, it turned out that, okay, doing a consultancy role, working sort of shorter bursts with more clients, etc. So yeah, third and final bit of advice is, I guess, to use it as a chance to really be selfish. If you're going to do it properly. Go the whole 9 yards and make sure you fashion exactly what you would get most fulfillment from. It's held me in really good stead. And also, I mean, take it with a massive like pinch of white privilege. I've had 1,000,001 second chances throughout my life. Yeah, I guess maybe it was a little easier for me than a lot of people may find it, but generally that's what I would say. A lot of lead time, put in the groundwork, put in the preparation, and use it as a chance to really, really build exactly what you want.
And last question, do you still think about that time you were underage drinking in a pub and your dad's friend walked in?
Oh God, yeah. In fact, I thought about it on this call, because when I said I was raised on a diet of Timothy Taylor's, it was the most cringeworthy thing. Yeah, I think about that a lot.
For anyone watching, it was a tweet by Harry, last year sometime, and I just find it funny.
Yeah, so for people watching who've got no idea what seems like an in-joke might be, you got those things where you're lying in bed, it's 2 a.m, you can't sleep, and all of a sudden your mind goes to that one most embarrassing thing you ever did, and you're like, oh my goodness, I can't believe I did that. When I was about 15, 16 years old, there was a pub called the Stafford Arms, right, which was great because it was a mile or two out of my town, nearby village. right on the top of the moors, like quite high up, quite not isolated, but a long old trek, which meant it wasn't really a hot spot for underage drinkers. It was always full of old folk. And me and my pal, we were like 15, 16, we'd go and have a pint of landlord and do the pub quiz with all like the pensioners. And they knew we were underage, but they turned a blind eye or whatever. I shouldn't have named them as the Stafford Arms. They might go and get shut down now. It wasn't the Stafford Arms, it was a completely other pub. But yeah, so I was in there. Oh God, this is horrible. I was in there. And my dad's friend walked in. And even though people knew we were underage, I didn't want to be known. I was at least anonymous until my dad's mate walked in. I'm like, oh shit, Richard's here. He knows I'm not old enough. I need to keep him on side. I need to make adult conversation. So I went, oh, Richard, how was Christmas? And he looked at me and went, yeah, it was fine. It was February. It was February. And I was asking him about his Christmas. And he was just like, geez, I think he's had too many. And that still plagues me. That's still about twice a week I'll remember that. Oh, it was horrible. Oh, God. Hey, how was Christmas? Yeah, it was good 2.5 months ago.
Well, brilliant. Thanks for talking to me about today. And for those who want to find you on social media, where can they find you?
Predictably and regrettably, on everything, I am CSS Wizardry. Oh, there's another thing, right? Fourth thing in your plan for going self-employed, pick a better domain name than CSS Wizardry, right? There's your fourth point. So yeah, GitHub, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, etc. It's all CSS Wizardry.